Hello, this is Zarja from myTamarin. We are here in our baby studio, and today we're going to be talking about sleep. And we have the best person for this topic here. So this is Dawn. Before becoming a maternity nurse, she used to work as a health visitor in NHS, and as part of that role, she led sleep clinics. So, welcome, Dawn.
Thank you.
First question for you, Dawn. Why sleep such a big topic for babies and newborns? And you know, don't we say like sleep like a baby, and don't babies sleep all the time anyway?
I think it's a case of if babies sleep too much, parents worry. If they don't sleep enough, they worry. It's such an emotive thing, that and feeding is such a huge thing, and a lot of parents don't understand the parameters. So I guess what we're going to be doing now is trying to demystify some of it and reassure parents that actually a baby needs to learn how to get themselves into sleep without using too many cues and props that they rely on those and can't ever fall asleep without having those.
Okay, so let's start right here. You mentioned babies need to learn how to sleep. What does
Yes.
that mean? And how can new parents teach babies to fall asleep and stay asleep?
Okay, I think the first thing to do is to put it into context and think about what it's like when your baby first comes out into the big wide world. So from being very contained in a very ambient temperature, surrounded by warm fluid, there they are, sort of propelled into this world where all their limbs can flail around and their heads can move freely, and the strange elements touching them. They have their clothes stripped off, they have their nappies changed. And the startle reflex with babies is well recognized, that if they don't, they're not familiar with something and they're quite worried, their little arms go up. So I think that the first thing to say is be very sensitive to your baby's environment when you get home. So make sure that your room, or the room that they're sleeping in or that they're spending the daytimes in, as far as you can manage it, is between sort of 18 and 21 degrees and doesn't vary too much, because they lose heat very quickly and they gain heat quickly. So you have to be quite mindful of that. Is my baby too hot that they can't sleep, or are they too cold and they can't? I think the big thing really is to recognize that babies do quite like to be swaddled.
Okay.
Because again, as we've talked about, the reflex and being able to flail their arms around and their legs when they're asleep, and they jerk themselves awake and can't get back to sleep, can be quite distressing. Magnificent range of swaddles out there, all sorts of YouTube clips on how to use them and the types that are best for babies. So I would say that's probably a key thing. And also running your own checklist of, if you're expecting your baby to go to sleep, what is prohibiting it? Are they hungry? Have they got a full nappy? Are they too hot? Are they too cold? Or is the light too bright? Or do they just need a little cuddle to reassure them that their mum is there, all is well with the world, until they gently drift and you can lay them down comfortably.
Okay, so let's take a step back. You mentioned, when you expect baby to go to sleep, then you should. But how do I even know that baby is expected to sleep? So if we set some foundations, how much should a newborn baby actually be sleeping, or what is reasonable to expect in terms of hours of sleep, both at night as well as during the day?
Okay. For a newborn baby, you take it over 24 hours because they are going to need pretty frequent feeding. But you would generally say that for the first month of their lives, they need between 16 to 18 hours of sleep a day. 16 being the absolute minimum, and babies are going to vary slightly, but that's the expectation.
Now, that sounds like a bliss. Like you just got this beautiful cute baby and they're sleeping for 16 to 18 hours, but I don't remember any of that because it felt like they were constantly waking up.
Yes.
And I needing to help them to fall back into sleep. And by the time I like settled them, there was something and they woke up. So
Yes.
where do I start as a new parent?
Okay. It's quite a tight framework in a way, because if you assume that a newborn baby may be having up to 8 feeds in 24 hours and may slot a few extras in just for full measure while they are, beginning to kind of build up their weight and everything. If you add an hour for every feed onto the expectation of the 18 hours of sleep, you can see that you run out of number of potential hours of sleep in 24 hours. So what that tells you is that a baby really, if it's feeding for 30 to 40 minutes and being changed and settled, you've probably only got an hour window, an hour and a quarter at the most with a newborn baby before they're ready for another sleep. The window of opportunity for babies to fall asleep is quite short. So even when they're pretty tiny, you will see a baby begin to get fractious or disengaged when they are beginning to get quite tired. You overstep that too much and it becomes harder for them to manage it, and it takes a bigger process to get them to sleep. And that's all part of the learning curve for parents, is recognizing the sleepy cues and just how frequently your baby actually does need to sleep in that first month.
Okay, so I guess as a parent, you're working with two things. One, you know roughly how much they should be sleeping and how frequently they should be feeding and therefore sleeping afterwards.
Yes. Yes.
But you also mentioned that there are sleep cues. Can you
Yes.
talk a little bit more about these sleep cues and how can parents recognize them, and how, like, what are the biggest mistakes that lead to missing them?
Okay, I would say you probably realistically wouldn't be looking too closely for them in the first couple of weeks. You are so busy, getting yourself into your rhythms and your routines and learning about your baby. So I wouldn't want parents to get strung out thinking they've got to start observing this immediately. But as your baby begins to develop a greater awareness and a feeling of safety of the world around them and begins to know what to expect, when they've fed, if they don't fall asleep feeding, which I have to say that babies in the first month often do, and you can't do much about that, but we can talk about that later. If a baby has had a good feed and is still a little bit awake, even with their limited vision, their visual acuity from sort of the breast to your face isn't bad. So you might find they're kind of scanning the features of your face and they're looking quite interested. If they're doing something like that and they start to disengage or grumble a bit or start to yawn or take their eyes off you, that is the first indicator that they're getting quite tired. And if you can move quite swiftly from a nurturing cuddle to laying them down before they're completely asleep, you're on the right track. Doesn't mean you can do it all the time, but it's a good principle.
So are you also saying that babies, although they need like 16 to 18 hours of sleep in 24-hour period, they don't actually know how to fall asleep or when to fall asleep? So we actually have to help them. We have to facilitate that process.
They do need help, that's for sure, but everybody has seen an overtired baby that simply can't cope anymore and just goes out like a light. You can be holding them 1 minute and suddenly they'll go floppy on you. And again, all babies are different. Some babies will fight it to the nth degree, and you'll probably find they're still trying to fight it when they're 18 months old. And other babies are just very placid. They're feeders, sleepers, feeders, sleepers. So you have to take your baby's personality into account as you are learning and growing with them about whether your baby is perhaps a little bit of a sleep resistor or is quite a spontaneous sleeper. And you don't know what you're going to get till you've got it, to be honest with you.
Okay. I mean, obviously every baby has a different personality, but is it still fair to say that every baby should be getting 16 to 18 hours of sleep and like regular sleeping, even though they're not showing the adult signs of, being sleepy, which means like slowly calming down? They could be showing the opposite, like being all fidgety or all upset. Like even during those times, right? You have to say, no, I need to calm you down and help you to sleep, right?
Yeah. I think you've made a very good point there, and I would kind of carry that through into guidance when children are older. It's a paradox of children that the more tired they become, it's chronic and it's accumulative, but they seem more hyperactive. And that's where parents do start to run into trouble, because a toddler who's exhibiting that, parents will think, oh, my child doesn't need to sleep very much. And so the problem manifests itself. If you can start getting your baby's sleep patterns into a good rhythm in the first couple of months, you are going to have a much easier time of it as they grow through their other stages and challenges as they get older.
I'm totally guilty of what you have just said. So my toddlers, I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, and sure enough, in the evenings they will get like very, very active. They will run across the living room, and especially when we have grandparents or uncles and aunts, like they're not tired. You see them, they have so much energy. Yeah, you have kids who don't need that much sleep, but the reality is they just are so overtired. They're running on fumes. They are running. and we know, I mean, we've learned now, like it's 3 or 5 years, that actually that is a sign of overtiredness. So
Yes.
how do you prevent overtiredness with a newborn baby?
Okay. I'm going to say first that you used a very key word that parents use. I am guilty of. You're not guilty of anything because you don't know any different until somebody tells you. So the object of this exercise is to say to parents, your baby needs the security of knowing that you are there. They need certain criteria met in order for them to feel safe. They need to learn a sequence of events that they recognize as being pre-sleep indicators, so they know what's going to happen next. And they need to be able to learn to put themselves to sleep in time. You can't expect a 2-3 week old baby to do that, but every day you are beginning to work towards it. By, for example, if a baby doesn't seem to settle in a cot, you think, okay, well, maybe they just need a little bit more swaddling. Maybe they just need to feel me for a little bit longer. Maybe they need to be just relaxed and comfortable before I lay them down. Maybe if there was something that smelt of a mum in the cot, like a used breast pad or a little bit of something tucked between the sheet and the mattress to help a baby. All these things will be accumulative tips to help your baby sleep independent from you.
Okay, so that's a lot of knowledge already. So let me try to summarize what we've learned so far. So one is babies don't really know how to fall asleep, so we need to help them.
Yes.
Two, swaddling can actually be quite helpful because it puts them back into that position that they were used to in
Yes.
a tummy.
Contained. Yeah.
It's also very important to catch them before they get overtired. So constantly
Yes.
sort of looking for cues and sort of using that rhythm where they start disengaging. That's when it's time to put them to sleep. And
Yes.
then, trying for them to not fall asleep on you while feeding, but sort of independently of you in a cot, which you can assist with, putting Muslims that you had on yourself before that smell like you. Um,
Absolutely.